another episode of the Adrienne Ross Show on the BMG Network, thebmgnetwork.com, or maybe you're watching on the BMG Network's YouTube channel or listening on a major podcast platform. Hello, I'm glad you are tuned in. And I'm going to jump right into today's episode. I'm going to talk about the Kyle Rittenhouse situation today. By now, of course, you know that the not guilty on all counts verdict has been in for a few days. And I want to share my perspective, as well as my perspective on a few other things as they pertain to this situation and really to society as a whole, where we are right now. I will start with something provocative, okay? But, that's kind of what I do. I provoke thought, So here's my statement, my provocative statement. There are people who are pretending to be outraged by the verdict, but are actually ecstatic. Yeah, I said that. There are people who are pretending to be outraged, but are actually ecstatic that Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty. Now, Adrienne, what do you mean? That's kind of strange. Well, not really. There are people protesting, whether they're out in the streets protesting or protesting from their keyboard, getting on social media, etc., and complaining and protesting and screaming out all kinds of accusations, and they're so outraged, so they want you to think, but they're not outraged. They are actually excited and happy that this verdict came about. Why do I say that? I say that because had the verdict been guilty, then they wouldn't have anything to complain about. They wouldn't have any reason to go back out in the streets and act wild. They wouldn't have any reason to scream white supremacy. So they wouldn't know what to do with themselves because they've been waiting with bated breath to have this opportunity to call something racism, which has nothing to do with race as far as I know, this particular trial, but everything has to do with race right now with certain people. And they were just waiting. Is that mean to say? I don't know if it's mean, but I think it's accurate. I think it's accurate that there are people, if they're not complaining and throwing race out there, then they have absolutely nothing to do. So they're happy because now they can get out there and talk about what they love to talk about, which is everybody's a racist, even when race has nothing to do with anything. I have to say that I don't think that there's anyone who paid attention to the details of the trial, whether they consumed all of it or not. I didn't sit there and consume it all. I didn't watch any of it on television, but through the internet and podcasts and just following along as I could, the details and hearing the testimonies, etc., and the reports of those. It was, to me, obvious, and to many, that there was no evidence that should have convicted this young man who was 17 years old at the time of the incident, 18 years old now. And so I think most people paying attention, if they're honest, would have to say that there was no way he should have been convicted. And people were surprised that it took that long to render a verdict. And usually when something like this takes that long, it's not necessarily a good thing. The longer it takes in this situation, you're thinking, oh, what could these people possibly be thinking? And then there's the public pressure. Like, will the members of the jury feel that they have to render a guilty verdict because everybody gonna act a fool again if they don't? I mean, I wouldn't even want that kind of pressure. Are they going to be able to do the right thing without fear, without their lives being threatened, etc.? Because, people are just off the hook. So I'm saying that people who were paying even a little bit of attention to the details, the testimonies, etc., unless you're, I don't even know what to say, but I don't know how anyone could think that this young man did not have the right to defend himself. So I'm going to ask this question, which may also be provocative. I don't know, but I'm going to ask this question. Who among us, who out there has a son or a daughter you wouldn't want to have been able to defend themselves that particular day? I mean, I know there's a lot of talk, a lot of chatter, a lot of whatever about the Second Amendment, but we do have a Second Amendment in this country, and I'm grateful that we do. We have the right to defend ourselves. And as far as I don't want anybody to die. I don't want anyone to get shot. But think about your kids. Think about your loved ones. What would you have liked? Would you have, you talk about the Second Amendment, you say he shouldn't have had a gun, you say, but if it's a situation between, okay, your death and your ability to defend yourself, your family, if your family, your child, your son, your daughter, your mom, your grandma, whoever, I mean, you would rather that they be unprepared to defend themselves. And so should this young man, people are calling a racist and a white supremacist for some reason, this young man was supposed to just take it, which is what the prosecution was saying. Like, sometimes you just get beat up in a fight. Well, sometimes you might not want to roll up on people when you don't know what the deal is. Sometimes you might not want to threaten someone else's life and try to bully people. Sometimes you might just think before you go rolling up on a kid and trying, pointing something at him and then expecting him to not defend himself. And then you're going to use, he didn't kill any black people, but he's a racist. And all of a sudden, this is all about race again. And if he were black, then this would happen. And if he were black and this, he wasn't black. The people who shot weren't black. He's not black. They're not black. And yet it's about race. We've got an issue in this country. First of all, he wouldn't have had to be out there if folks weren't acting a fool, burning stuff down, tearing up areas. And so you might say, well, he's 17 at the time. He's young. He should not have been one of the ones out there trying to protect, watch out for. And you may have a point. It may have been absolutely unwise for him to be out there. But being unwise, the last time I checked, is not a crime. Being unwise is not, it doesn't give permission for someone else to try to take you out. It's just unwise. So he can be unwise and still be not guilty. He can be unwise, if you think so, and still have a right to defend himself when wherever he is threatened and his life is in danger. So we've got to be at a point, people, where we have to look at the facts. Not everything is racism, And again, if it were your son, your daughter, your loved one, would you rather they have just taken one for the team, just been shot, just been beat down, just been maimed and all that? No. And so, the rush to call him a white supremacist and all that, I mean, and even from the president of the United States, if I were Kyle Rittenhouse, I have to say this, and people will call me a sellout or whatever. You can call me whatever you want, but self-defense knows no color. You've got a right to defend yourself, period. And so I'm not, if you're expecting me to be in a box and to think like everybody thinks, and, oh, he shouldn't have done this, and if he were black, and making it a matter of race, you got the wrong person. And I'm not going to be bullied into thinking a certain way. Not joining the chorus of that. But then we have even the president of the United States who's saying things. People on media, people in the media just calling him a murderer and all this other stuff. And if I were Kyle Rittenhouse, I would sue the mess out of these people who slandered him. And then, of course, those who were talking about the crocodile tears and all that. Listen, this kid, he's 18 now. He was 17 then, and his life is on the line. And he's got to live with what took place, which he felt was necessary to defend his life. And of course he's crying. Of course he collapses when the verdict comes in. What an ordeal. I don't know him. I ain't paid to defend him. And again, it doesn't matter about Kyle Rittenhouse. It's not about whether he were white, whether he was black, whatever. He was a young man who was in a situation, the evidence shows, where he was justified in defending himself. And so now the people who are glad that they got this verdict so they can act a fool, well, that's what they're doing. And then, of course, there are some well-meaning people who just think this has to do with race somehow, I guess, and that's what they see. So maybe they are disappointed, but they shouldn't be disappointed. Because if they paid attention, they should have expected that this was the thing to do. This was the right verdict. And I'm proud of the jury for getting it right, because they could have succumbed to the pressure. And I pray that God protects them, because, and even the judge, for some of the strong stances he took, and I'm not going through everything, but just, well, if he were black and white supremacy and, and you know what? The thing about it is, some people, and this is really, really sad, but it's true. They don't care if Kyle Rittenhouse had a right to defend himself or not. They don't care if the verdict is the right one. They want somebody to pay for their wounds. Now, what do I mean by their wounds? I'm telling you that there are some folks who are just wounded. They're walking around with, they need to be healed, because if everything is like, it's race, and I'm a victim and we're victims, and if everything, I'm not saying racism doesn't exist, it does exist, and that's why it's so important that we get this thing right, because when everything is racist, nothing is racist. When you cry wolf all the time, then nobody takes you seriously, when this stuff is serious stuff. And so we need to function in a way so that when there's really something to deal with, then we have the credibility to deal with it. But when you only just talk, everything is race, nobody takes you seriously anymore. And it's a problem. Okay? But there's some people who are so wounded, many of whom have never dealt with real racism themselves, but they're so trapped in the history and the victimhood that they want somebody, and if it doesn't even matter if the person is not guilty, somebody has to pay the price for my pain. And let Kyle Rittenhouse be that sacrificial lamb. I don't care. But I need something to feed that area in my life. And it's wrong. It's wrong. So that's my perspective about the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict. Watch, read, pay attention, and expect that justice has to be served. Not your whim, not your hopes, not your desire to just throw not guilty people to the wolves. It's just not right. And especially Christians, I was hearing about churches that were praying that for the guilty verdict, and seeing I won't even name it, this particular group, supposedly Christian group on Instagram, and they just, oh my goodness, it's all about race. And I'm like, you know what, people of faith, you really need to check your hearts, because there's some folks that are parading around as Christians and the love of God, and we're brothers and sisters and all that, and they are so tied up in their own hearts with prejudice and victimhood and all this stuff. And we can't minister effectively to other people when that is our heart. We've got to make sure our heart's right. And we can't expect other people to pay for our issues. And in this situation, like I said, there are some people who are acting like they're upset, but really they're secretly happy. So now they can go out and do and say and complain, and that's just another notch on their whole long list of the racism in this country and how hard, they've got that whole thing going on. Instead of thinking, you know what, I'm proud of this country and how we do things. We are not, I shouldn't even have to say this, but we are not perfect. And we don't have a perfect past, obviously. But this is the greatest country on the face of the earth. And I believe the jury got it right. And he defended himself. And he had a right to defend himself. And whether or not you think he should have been there or not is beside the point. He was there. And there, he has a right to defend himself. And he, and in this country, whether you like it or not, we have the right. We have a Second Amendment. We have the right to bear arms. We have a right to do that. And for those who say, well, he should have just taken it. What? Are you kidding me? That's what you want your son and your daughter to do, to just be out there and be exposed? And maybe you say, well, my son and daughter wouldn't have been out there. Okay, fine. But he was. And some of your kids have been places they had no business being either. But that doesn't mean that they deserve to be harassed and their lives threatened. But if those lives are threatened, don't you want them to be able to defend themselves? So let's check our hearts, and let's pray for this nation, because again, an excuse for some to get all wild. And then maybe there are those out there who deserve respect because they protest peacefully or whatever, But what are we protesting? What are we really protesting? White supremacy, which has nothing to do with this at all. And he has since come out and said he actually supports Black Lives Matter. But you know what? These folks tearing down neighborhoods and all this other stuff. And you know what? That was unnecessary. So then people feel the need to step up and just be there to guard and protect. And, I don't know, but I am going to say this, and at the risk of being called a sellout, a self-hating black person. I've heard that. What else have I heard? At the risk of all that, which doesn't move me neither here nor there, because I know the truth. I'm still gonna say that I'm glad that this young man, 18 years old, 17 when it happened, is not spending his life locked away when he was defending himself. And there's the prosecution simply did not prove its case. Absolutely did not. And so the jury had to do what the jury had to do, which is to render not guilty. I pray that we can unite in this country instead of looking for reasons to be divided. Because I do believe that there's some people they're looking to be divided. They're looking to be offended. And there's one thing about that is, if you're looking to be offended, you will never, ever be disappointed, because you will find it. You will. So that's my perspective on the Kyle Rittenhouse case, on the verdict, and on various things in our society as a whole. And so thank you again for tuning in to this episode of the Adrienne Ross Show. And if you like what you hear, or maybe you don't like what you hear, but you like hearing me say what you don't agree with, perhaps, would you go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen that allows them and leave a rating and a review. I would really appreciate it. And also go to the bmgnetwork.com and check out our other podcasts. I believe our podcasters are insightful and informative and engaging and even entertaining. And so you enjoy that on bmgnetwork.com. So share this with someone, and I appreciate your listening to my perspective, and God bless you abundantly. The Adrienne Ross Show was produced and edited in the BMG studio. The music was provided by Kevin MacLeod. Find more episodes of The Adrienne Ross Show at thebmgnetwork.com and major podcast platforms. Be sure to tune in regularly. You don't want to miss even one episode.